Mr. Shepard has been surveilling my residence with concealed cameras, following my vehicle, and creating a pattern of targeted intimidation.
That's what the HOA president told a judge when she filed for a restraining order against me. The judge looked at my footage. 3 cameras, all pointed at my own property. Then she looked at Tammy's footage. 47 documented trips onto my land at 2 in the morning, loading my firewood into a garden cart and hauling it home. 47 times. The judge denied the restraining order and told her she was the one trespassing. That night, minus 15 degrees, she went right back to my woodpile, took 3 more logs, burned them in her fireplace. And those 3 logs were packed with glitter bombs and UV reactive dye that I'd hidden inside using skills from 20 years of furniture making. She had no idea her living room was filling with evidence she'd never wash out. And at the next HOA meeting, when I turned on the blacklight, everyone saw it. What would you do? But let me start from the beginning. My grandfather taught me to build things in a cinder block shop behind his house in Pueblo, Colorado. I was 7 when he first closed my hand around a spoke shave and showed me how to follow the grain. The shop smelled like cedar shavings and linseed oil, and the light came through one window caked with sawdust, so thick the afternoon sun turned amber. He made furniture the way some men write poetry, slowly, deliberately, with no tolerance for shortcuts. By the time I was 16, I could joint a board by hand and feel the high spots with my fingertips. By 22, I was selling custom pieces out of a rented garage in Buena Vista. By 30, I had a name. Wyatt Shepard, custom furniture maker, Summit County, Colorado. I bought my cabin at 9,500 feet on 5 acres of ponderosa, pine and blue spruce. The land backed up against national forest. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down a dirt road. The air up there is so thin and dry in winter, it cracks your lips before you finish your first cup of coffee. I built my workshop 40 feet from the cabin, insulated it myself, wired it for 220, hung my grandfather's tools on pegboard above the bench. The shop became the center of everything. My clients were ski lodges, brew pubs, and people building second homes who wanted something that felt handmade because it was. I built dining tables from beetle kill pine. I built mantles from reclaimed barn timber. Every piece left my shop smelling like the forest it came from. Then Shannon left. My wife decided mountain living was romantic until the pipes froze, the road iced over, and the nearest Target was an hour away. She moved to Denver with a commercial real estate broker named Todd, who wore loafers without socks. She loved mountain living until she had to live it. I got the cabin, the shop, and Lily every other week. Lily is 10, brown hair, serious eyes, quiet unless she has something worth saying. She sits on an overturned 5-gallon bucket in my shop and watches me work. Sawdust collects in her hair, and she doesn't brush it out. She asks questions about grain direction and wood species the way other kids ask about dinosaurs. She's the reason I keep the stove burning all night when she's with me. She's the reason everything that happened next mattered more than it should have. I heat the cabin with wood. Always have. 8 cords split every fall, stacked along the south side of the cabin, where the sun hits longest and the snow melts first. Oak for the slow burns, pine for the quick heat. Cherry when I want the house to smell like something worth remembering. Splitting wood is meditation with a maul. The crack, the separation, the 2 halves falling away from each other. There's an honesty in it that I've never found anywhere else. Timbercrest estates went in around me like water around a rock. 28 homes on half-acre lots, climbing the ridge below my property. Cedar-sided, metal-roofed, each one with a hot tub and a 3-car garage. My cabin predates the subdivision by 30 years. I'm not in the HOA. Never signed their documents, never attended their meetings. My lot sits above their development, like a grandfather watching children play in his yard. They built around me, not the other way around. Tammy Voss became HOA president 4 years before any of this started. Blonde, heavy-set, mid-50s, with a voice that carried across parking lots and a personality that filled rooms the way smoke fills a jar, completely and not pleasantly. She drove a white Range Rover with a personalized plate that read TMYVOSS. She wore Gucci sunglasses pushed up on her head like a tiara and carried a clipboard the way a general carries a sidearm. Always ready, always loaded. Our first meeting was a Tuesday morning in October. She walked up my driveway without invitation, heels sinking in the gravel, and asked for documentation of compliance regarding my woodpile. I told her I wasn't in the HOA. She said the woodpile fell within a visual impact zone. I told her that's not a real thing. She wrote something on her clipboard, turned without another word, and walked back to her Range Rover. The gravel crunched under her heels like she was grinding each stone personally. I stood there holding a cup of coffee that was getting cold, and thought about what kind of person drives to someone else's property uninvited to demand compliance with rules that don't exist. The answer is a person who's never been told no by anyone willing to back it up. The firewood started disappearing 2 weeks later. 8 to 10 logs per cold night, gone by morning. The first week, I thought I'd miscounted. I'm careful, but nobody's perfect. The second week, I started marking logs with blue chalk, small X on the cut end, invisible unless you knew to look. By the third week, I'd confirmed it. Someone was taking my wood, consistently, methodically, and only on the coldest nights. I bought a trail camera, the kind hunters use, infrared, motion-triggered, bolted to a pine tree 20 feet from the woodpile. The first night it captured 12 images. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The temperature overlay read 11 degrees, and there was Tammy Voss in a black parka with a fur-lined hood, loading 10 logs into a green garden cart with one squeaky wheel. Her face was clear on infrared. Her breath hung in the air like small ghosts. She made 2 trips that night. 20 logs, my logs. I sat in the dark watching the footage on my laptop and felt something settle in my chest that wasn't anger. It was clarity. The kind you get when a problem that felt murky suddenly has a face, a timestamp, and a squeaky wheel. I walked to her house the next morning. She answered the door in a bathrobe holding a coffee mug that said, "Boss Lady," in gold lettering. I told her I had footage of her taking my firewood. She didn't flinch. She said there was an outdoor combustible storage guideline that required wood stored in common view areas to be available for community fire safety purposes. I asked her to show me that guideline. She said it was adopted by the board in executive session and wasn't available for public distribution, a rule she invented in a meeting that probably never happened. To justify stealing wood she was too cheap to buy. I stood on her porch, looking past her into a hallway with marble tile and a crystal chandelier, and realized I was arguing property rights with a woman who'd already decided she was above them. Here's what made it worse. Tammy drives a $90,000 Range Rover. She has a $15,000 gas fireplace in her living room, the kind with ceramic logs and a remote control. She wasn't burning my wood for heat. She was burning it in her decorative fireplace for what she called an authentic mountain aesthetic. My neighbor Connor told me she posted photos of it on Instagram. Hashtag authentic mountain living, hashtag crackling fire vibes. She was stealing my firewood for social media content, for the aesthetic. I'd split that oak by hand in September heat, sweat dripping onto the splitting stump, blisters on my palms that hardened into calluses by October. I'd stacked it to season for 6 months, turned the pile twice to ensure even drying, covered it against rain and snow, and she was burning it for Instagram likes. The irony was so thick you could split it with a maul. A woman with a gas fireplace and a remote control was stealing hand-split hardwood to create the illusion of a life she was too lazy to actually live. The retaliation came fast. 3 violation notices in 1 week. First, workshop noise complaint. Excessive sound from power equipment. I use hand tools, chisels, planes, mallets. The loudest sound in my shop is the shh of a hand plane on Walnut. Second, my truck was cited for being parked beyond the 72-hour limit on a residential access road. It was in my own driveway. Third, and this one still makes my jaw tight, Lily's bicycle leaning against the front porch was cited as unapproved exterior storage of recreational equipment. A $150 fine for a 10-year-old's bike. I didn't pay the fines. I photographed every notice, dated them, and added them to a folder on my computer labeled Voss. That folder would get thick before this was over. That evening, I stood on my porch and smelled it. Oak smoke drifting from Tammy's chimney, curling through the cold air and settling in the valley like a blanket. My oak, split by my hands, seasoned on my land, burned for her Instagram. The smell was warm and sweet, the way good hardwood always is. But knowing the source turned it bitter, like watching someone wear your dead father's jacket and call it vintage. I took the trail camera footage to Sheriff Paxton the following Monday. His office smelled like old coffee and paper dust. He watched the clips on my phone, Tammy at 2:14 a.m., loading logs, face clear, garden cart, 2 trips. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That's pretty clearly her," he said. Then he called it a neighborhood disagreement and suggested mediation. I asked him who would mediate. He said the HOA board. I reminded him that Tammy is the HOA board. He shrugged like a man who'd already decided this wasn't his problem. If someone filmed themselves driving Tammy's Range Rover off her driveway at 2 in the morning, the sheriff would probably call that a disagreement too, until the insurance company got involved. Then suddenly it's Grand Theft Auto. But Firewood? Firewood is just a misunderstanding between neighbors. I walked out of that office knowing something I should have known from the start. Nobody was going to fix this for me. Not the sheriff, not the county, not the system Tammy had spent years learning to manipulate. If I wanted justice, I'd have to build it myself. And building things is what I do. 2 weeks later, Tammy sent an official HOA letter on embossed stationery. 3 demands. First, repaint the cabin exterior in an approved palette. The palette was 4 shades of beige and 1 gray that was also basically beige. Second, dismantle the workshop. She called it commercial activity in a residential zone. Third, relocate my woodpile to behind the cabin, out of view from the road. She wanted me to hide the thing she was stealing so nobody would see her steal it. The logic was so circular, it could have been a carousel. Steal the wood, find the owner, demand the wood be moved to where it's easier to steal. Repeat. She wasn't running an HOA, she was running a loop. The knock came on a Thursday night. Connor Braddock, my neighbor 2 lots down, retired Denver PD, built like a fire hydrant with a beard. He stood on my porch holding 2 beers and a printed screenshot from his own trail camera. The image showed Tammy at 1:30 a.m. in yoga pants and a headlamp, carrying an armload of his firewood. "I thought it was bears," he said. "Set up a camera. Wasn't bears." We sat on my porch in the cold and compared notes. Connor had lost 2 cords over 3 months. He was also missing a leaf blower and a string of solar pathway lights. We talked to 6 more households over the next week. The Petersons were missing a snowblower that Tammy had borrowed for something she called community snow management. 3 other families reported missing firewood, hand tools, and outdoor equipment. All of it disappeared at night. All of it was stuff Tammy could reach from the road without being seen. Or so she thought. Tammy was running a slow-motion robbery operation, using her HOA position as cover. Complaints about theft went to the HOA board. The HOA board was Tammy. It was a protection racket with a clipboard. The genius of it, if you could call it genius, was the position itself. An HOA president has access to addresses, schedules, property layouts, and a ready-made excuse for being on anyone's property at any hour. I was checking compliance. I was doing a visual inspection. I was responding to a noise complaint. The title was a skeleton key, and Tammy had been using it to walk through every door on the ridge. That night, I stood in my shop planing a slab of black walnut for a dining table commission. Shh, shh. The shavings curled off the blade like brown ribbons, falling to the floor in loose spirals. Black walnut smells like dark chocolate and damp earth. Rich, heavy, almost sweet. The repetitive motion of the plane helps me think. Push, lift, return, push, lift, return. By the time I set down the spoke shave, the slab was smooth as river glass. And I had a plan. Not a hot-headed plan. Not a confrontation plan. A furniture maker's plan. Patient, precise. Designed to fit together so perfectly that by the time she realized what happened, every joint would be glued and every seam would be invisible. I came home from picking Lily up at school on a Wednesday afternoon in late November. The first thing I saw was yellow pine sawdust on the snow, fresh, bright against the white like pollen on a tablecloth. I told Lily to stay in the truck and walked around the side of the cabin. 2 stumps, raw, pale, weeping sap, 2 60-year-old ponderosa pines. Trees that were here before the cabin, before the subdivision, before Tammy Voss ever heard of Summit County, lying on their sides in the snow. The root balls were still half in the ground. A tree service had cut them with a chainsaw, dropped them where they stood, and left. The saw marks were clean and professional. The wood was still pale and damp, fresh enough that I could smell the resin from 10 feet away. Sharp and green, the smell of a wound that hadn't begun to heal. Lily got out of the truck anyway. Kids do that. Dad, what happened to the big trees? Her voice was shaking. Not crying, shaking. The kind of voice a child uses when the world stops making sense. I found the card stapled to one of the stumps. Tree service logo, phone number, and a handwritten note. Authorized removal per HOA directive. Trees encroaching on common area boundary, signed T. Voss. She had signed her own name, on my property. Authorizing the destruction of my trees, like writing a confession and stapling it to the evidence. The trees were 15 feet inside my property line. I knew this because I'd had the lot surveyed when I bought it. They weren't encroaching on anything except the sky. I hired Nolan Pike, a certified arborist out of Frisco. He came out, measured the stumps, checked the root systems, and wrote a report. The trees were entirely within my parcel. There was no fire risk per Colorado State Forest Service guidelines. The removal was unauthorized, unjustified, and illegal. I called the tree service. The foreman said a woman called, said she was the HOA president, said the trees were a hazard, said to bill the community account. He didn't verify the property line. He didn't ask for a permit. He just showed up with a chainsaw and cut down 2 trees that had been alive since Eisenhower was president. When I told him the trees were on private property and the woman who called him had no authority, there was a long silence. Then he said he'd cooperate with whatever legal action I wanted to take. But Tammy wasn't done. That weekend, she hosted what she called a community winter festival in the Timbercrest common area. Folding tables, hot chocolate, and a woodpile, my woodpile. She was selling my pine, the ponderosas she'd had cut down on my land, in neat bundles tied with twine. $12 a bundle. I counted the bundles. $150. $1,800. All of it going into something she called the HOA Community Improvement Fund, an account with one signer, Tammy Voss. She posted about it on Facebook, a photo of herself standing behind the firewood table, smiling, captioned, "So grateful for this community." Hashtag Timbercrest family. Hashtag mountain living. Hashtag giving back. Giving back by giving away what she stole. It was poetry in the worst possible way. I filed a civil complaint the next Monday. Destruction of private property. 2 ponderosa pines, each with a replacement value of $8,400 based on the arborist's assessment. Total damages, $16,800. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I'd fired a shot. But I knew it wasn't enough. Tammy would fight it, delay it, turn it into her own persecution narrative. She'd tell the board I was attacking the community. I needed more. That night, Lily and I stood at the stumps. The sap had hardened in the cold, catching the moonlight in amber beads that looked like tears frozen mid-fall. She pressed her hand against the smooth-cut surface. "Can we plant new ones?" "Yeah, sweetie." "Will they get as big?" "Eventually, not while you're 10, but eventually." She nodded. She accepted that. Kids understand time better than adults sometimes. They know some things take longer than a lifetime. They're okay with that. The pine resin smell hung in the air, sharp, sweet, painful. The scent of something alive now dead because a woman with a clipboard decided she could do whatever she wanted. I breathed it in and felt it burn like menthol at the back of my throat. Connor came over the next evening with a 6-pack and a theory. He sat at my kitchen table, peeling the label off his beer with his thumbnail, a habit from 30 years of interrogation rooms. "Something's off with the money," he said. "HOA dues are $3,600 a year, 28 houses. That's over $100,000 annually. Where's it going?" I hadn't thought about the money. I'd been focused on trees and firewood and Lily's bicycle fine. But Connor had been a detective for 22 years. He smelled fraud the way I smelled wood species, instinctively, before the conscious mind caught up. Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act gives HOA members the right to inspect financial records. Connor submitted a formal written request to the board. Tammy stalled for 6 weeks. When she finally responded, she sent a 1-page budget summary with rounded numbers and no receipts. Total income, approximately $100,000. Total expenses, approximately $98,000. Balance, approximately $2,000. Every number was approximate. No line items. No vendor names, no bank statements. I hired Jeanette Hollis, forensic accountant out of Denver. Small, quiet woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a cardigan that made her look like a librarian. She'd helped prosecute 3 embezzlement cases in Jefferson County. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She read numbers the way a radiologist reads x-rays, looking for the shadow that doesn't belong. It took her 3 weeks. What she found was a masterwork of small-time corruption. Discovery 1. The Community Fire Pit Fund. Tammy had collected $14,000 from residents over 2 years for a community fire pit. There was no fire pit. There had never been a fire pit. There were no permits, no contractor bids, no material orders. The money had been transferred in small amounts, 300 here, 500 there, to a checking account ending in 7714, Tammy's personal checking account. Discovery 2, the Snow Removal Fund. The HOA budget showed $28,000 per year for snow removal. The actual contract with the plow company was $11,000. The difference, $17,000 per year, times 5 years, equaled $85,000. All of it routed to account 7714. Discovery 3, landscaping. The HOA paid $22,000 per year to Summit Ridge Landscaping, LLC for grounds maintenance. Summit Ridge Landscaping, LLC was registered with the Colorado Secretary of State to one Dale Voss, Tammy's husband, a shell company. Tammy was paying HOA money to her own husband's company for work that was either never performed or wildly overpriced. Total embezzlement, $87,000 over 5 years. And Dale Voss sat on the County Planning Commission. He'd approved 4 variance requests for Timbercrest properties without disclosing his family relationship to the HOA president. One of those variances extended Tammy's own house past the setback line. He approved his own wife's construction project while sitting on the commission that regulated it. Here's what the audience should know. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to the members. That means they're legally obligated to manage funds honestly and transparently. In Colorado, embezzlement of HOA funds exceeding $5,000 is a Class 4 felony. That carries 2 to 6 years in state prison. And a planning commissioner who votes on matters involving a family member without disclosure commits an ethics violation subject to removal and potential prosecution. I sat in my truck outside Jeanette's office in Denver with the audit report on the passenger seat. 8 pages, $87,000, 5 years of theft, dressed up in budget summaries and rounded numbers. She didn't just steal firewood. She stole the whole community. Firewood was a hobby. Embezzlement was her operating system. And I was about to crash it. I drove home through the canyon as the sun dropped behind the divide. The mountains turned purple, then black, then just outlines against the last light. I thought about my grandfather's shop, about the way he used to say that the best joints are the ones you can't see. The wood looks like one piece, but inside, everything is interlocking. Everything is held together by geometry and pressure and patience. That's what I was building now. Not a table, not a cabinet, a case. And every piece had to fit. I started the work on a Saturday night in December. Lily was at Shannon's. The shop was quiet except for the hum of the space heater in the corner and the occasional pop of pine sap in the wood stove. I selected 20 oak logs from my woodpile. Dense, heavy, tight-grained white oak. The kind Tammy always took first because it burned the longest and looked the best in her decorative fireplace. I set up my grandfather's drill press, a cast-iron beast from 1962 that weighed more than I did and had never once wandered off center. I bored a hole in each log, 2-inch diameter, 8 inches deep, straight down the center, following the grain so the entry point would blend with the natural checks and cracks in the end grain. Oak curls piled on the floor like wood shavings from a giant pencil. Each hole was clean, precise, and invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Then I packed them. Layer 1, biodegradable glitter, commercial grade, non-toxic, designed for theatrical effects. The kind that erupts when heat builds pressure in an enclosed space, gold, silver, and hot pink. I used a funnel and a dowel rod to pack it tight. Layer 2, colored smoke powder, pink, the same compound used in gender reveal devices. When heated, it produces dense, vivid smoke that pours from any opening, non-toxic but spectacular. Layer 3, the linchpin, UV reactive dye. This is the same substance law enforcement uses in bait money operations. Banks pack it in dye packs that explode when a robber leaves the building. The dye is invisible to the naked eye under normal light, but under ultraviolet, a black light, it glows bright blue. It bonds to skin, it bonds to fabric, it bonds to porous surfaces like carpet, drywall, grout, and upholstery. It is almost impossible to wash off. It stays on hands for days. It stays in carpet for weeks. It stays in HVAC duct systems for months. UV reactive dye is completely legal. You can buy it online. It's a marking compound, not a weapon. Banks use it, police use it, and now a furniture maker in Summit County was using it. I sealed each log with a wooden plug, end-grain oak, cut from the same log, glued with waterproof wood glue, sanded flush with the surface, and hand-planed until the seam disappeared. No gap, no ridge, no visible sign of modification. 20 logs, each one identical to normal firewood, each one containing enough glitter, smoke powder, and UV reactive dye to turn a living room into a crime scene that glowed. I carved identification codes into the bottom end grain of each log with a 1/4-inch chisel, W01 through W20, small, precise marks hidden in the texture of the wood. Chain of custody. Every log traceable. Every log a piece of evidence waiting to be activated. I stacked the glitter logs on top of my woodpile, the spot where Tammy always grabbed. She took from the top. She was consistent. Creatures of habit make the best targets. I stepped back and looked at the woodpile in the shop lights. It looked normal. It looked like 8 cords of honest firewood stacked by a man who heated his home the old way. But the top 20 logs were anything but honest. They were the most carefully engineered pieces I'd ever built. And unlike my dining tables and mantels, these were designed to be destroyed. Their destruction was the whole point. Camera upgrade. I replaced the single trail camera with 3 HD cameras, one on the cabin eave, one on the shop wall, one on a pine tree facing the woodpile. All motion triggered, all cloud backed, all recording in resolution sharp enough to read a license plate at 40 feet. Jeanette was finalizing the audit report. $87,000, transaction by transaction, account by account, slide by slide. Each one formatted for a projector. Each one designed to be understood by anyone who'd ever written a check. Connor was contacting the 8 households that had been victimized. 5 were willing to speak publicly. 3 had their own trail camera footage. I worked past midnight. Lily's drawings were tacked to the shop wall. Trees, birds, a cabin with smoke coming from the chimney. The tap, tap, tap of the chisel was the only sound. Glue smell, sawdust smell, the faint sweetness of oak. I carved W-01, blew away the dust, ran my thumb across the surface. Smooth, perfect, like every piece I'd ever made in this shop. Except this one was designed to explode. Tammy found out about the civil complaint in January and went nuclear. She filed a noise complaint with the county. The allegation, my workshop was producing industrial-level sound pollution. I use hand tools. The loudest thing in my shop is the bench vise closing. She wanted the county to shut down a workshop quieter than her own Range Rover's idle. The complaint form listed jackhammers and industrial saws operating after midnight. I don't own a jackhammer. I don't own an industrial saw. The loudest I'd been that week was dropping a clamp on the concrete floor. It bounced twice. I doubt the neighbors heard it. Then the fire hazard report. She told the county my woodpile represented an imminent wildfire risk. In Colorado, wildfire is serious business. Entire towns have burned. Filing a false wildfire report isn't just petty. It's weaponizing a community's deepest fear. She knew what she was doing. She was counting on the county to react before they investigated. Dale made his move too. He called the county building inspector, a man named Virgil Heath, directly. Suggested an expedited review of my workshop and woodpile. Expedited in county government language means someone with authority is pushing it. Virgil came out on a Tuesday. He was methodical. Tape measure, clipboard, camera. He measured the distance from my woodpile to the nearest structure. 42 feet. The county guideline was 30 feet minimum. I was 12 feet over, compliant. He measured the workshop. Under 1,000 square feet. No employees, no signage, no retail customers. Legal home occupation under Summit County zoning. He closed his clipboard. Everything checks out. You're compliant on all counts. Then his phone rang. He'd left it on the workbench, speaker on. Dale Voss's voice came through like he was standing in the room. Listen, Virgil, I need that workshop cited. Find something. Virgil looked at the phone, looked at me, picked it up and held it to his ear. Commissioner Voss, I can't cite what isn't a violation, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't call me during an inspection. He hung up. Dale had just committed abuse of office on a phone call that Virgil and I both heard. A planning commissioner directing an inspector to fabricate a citation. Virgil wrote something in his notes. I didn't ask what. I didn't need to. But I noticed his jaw tighten the way a professional's does when someone tries to corrupt his work. He shook my hand on the way out. Firm, deliberate. The handshake of a man who just decided whose side he was on. The satire of Tammy's position was almost too perfect. She wanted to remove the woodpile she was stealing from. She simultaneously wanted to steal my wood and ban it from existing. That's not logic. That's greed arguing with itself. The glitter logs started doing their work. The first 3 disappeared on a Monday night. Camera footage, 1:47 a.m. Tammy in her black parka, garden cart. Yes, squeaky wheel. She took logs W03, W08, and W11. Her tracks in the fresh powder led straight back to her house like a dotted line on a treasure map. Tuesday morning, I stood on my porch with coffee and watched Tammy's chimney. Gray smoke, gray smoke. Then, for just a second, a puff of pink, then gray again. But I saw it, and I smiled into my coffee. 3 more disappeared Wednesday night. I watched the footage over breakfast. Tammy in her parka, breath in the cold, cart tracks in the snow. She never looked at the cameras. She never checked for modifications. She grabbed from the top of the pile the way she always did, with the confidence of someone who believes taking is the same as deserving. 2 more Thursday. By the end of the week, 8 glitter logs had been burned in Tammy's decorative fireplace. 8 payloads of UV dye, glitter, and smoke powder depositing on every surface in her living room, on her hands, in her carpet, in her curtains, in the grout of her stone hearth. The wind howled through the valley that night, low and long, the kind of cold that seeps through insulation and settles in your bones. The thermometer on my porch read -8. Perfect night to burn stolen firewood. Perfect night to fill your house with evidence you can't see. Tammy filed for a restraining order on a Friday morning. The petition alleged that Wyatt Shepherd had been following her vehicle, surveilling her residence with concealed cameras, photographing her without consent, and creating a hostile environment through targeted intimidation. She wanted me barred from coming within 500 feet of her property. The hearing was in Summit County Courthouse, Judge Catherine Wilkes presiding. Tammy sat at the petitioner's table in a navy blazer with gold buttons, a folder of evidence in front of her. The evidence was her own violation notices against me. Workshop noise, truck parking, Lily's bicycle. She'd built a harassment case out of her own harassment. My attorney, Elliot Greer, played the camera footage on a laptop connected to the courtroom monitor. Camera 1, mounted on my cabin eave, pointing at my driveway. Camera 2, mounted on my shop wall, pointing at my woodpile. Camera 3, mounted on a pine tree, pointing at my property line. All 3 aimed at my own land. Then he played Tammy's footage. 47 documented entries onto my property. Date stamped, time stamped. Tammy's face clear on everyone. Loading logs into a garden cart. Hauling them home. 47 trips. 3 months. Judge Wilkes removed her glasses and set them on the bench. Mrs. Voss, the evidence shows Mr. Shepherd's cameras are directed exclusively at his own property. Meanwhile, his footage documents you entering his property repeatedly, at night, without authorization. You are the one who has been trespassing. Restraining order denied. Tammy's attorney asked if she could collect her folder of evidence. The judge said she could. Tammy stood, gathered her papers, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, sharp, fast, the rhythm of a woman who still believed she was the victim. That night, the temperature dropped to -15. I checked my cameras in the morning. 2:23 a.m., Tammy, parka, cart. 3 logs, W07, W12, W15. She'd just lost in court for trespassing and immediately trespassed again. Not stubbornness, not defiance. Addiction. Clinical-level compulsion to take what wasn't hers. Next morning, pink smoke from her chimney. Connor texted me a photo. Pink smoke again. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I replied, it gets better. Autumn Creighton called me that afternoon, reporter for the Summit County Journal. She'd picked up the restraining order denial from the court docket. "There's a story here," she said. "There's a story, but it's not ready. Saturday. Annual HOA meeting, 2 o'clock. Should I bring a photographer?" "Bring a blacklight." More glitter logs burned that week. W-04, W-09, W-17. The UV dye was everywhere now. In Tammy's carpet, in her curtains, in the sofa fabric, in the hearth grout, on her hands, under her fingernails, in the leather seats of her Range Rover. She was living inside the evidence, sleeping in it, driving in it, walking around town with invisible blue dye on every surface she touched. Every time she gripped a steering wheel, adjusted her sunglasses, or picked up that clipboard, she was spreading the proof of her own theft across more surfaces. She had no idea. The dye was invisible under normal light. She couldn't feel it, couldn't smell it, couldn't see it on her white jacket or her beige carpet or the cream leather of her Range Rover. But it was there, and it was permanent, and it was. The last evening before the meeting, I stood at my woodpile in the cold. My breath came in clouds that dissolved into darkness. I put my hand on the top log, smooth, solid, indistinguishable from the others. Inside it, enough UV reactive dye to light up a courtroom. I left it there. Tammy might take it tonight. She might not. Either way, she'd already burned enough. Lily came outside in her coat and boots. "Is the meeting tomorrow, Dad?" "Yeah, sweetie." "Are you nervous?" "No, I'm ready." She went back inside to finish a drawing. I found it later on the kitchen table. A tree, tall and green, with a brown trunk and roots spreading underground. At the bottom, in orange crayon, for the new ones. The Timbercrest community room smelled like old coffee and industrial carpet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Folding tables arranged in a U-shape. A projector sat on a rolling cart near the front wall. 22 of 28 households were represented, more than usual. Word had gotten around that something was happening, even if nobody knew exactly what. Tammy stood at the front in a white puffer jacket, clipboard in hand, lipstick the color of a fire engine. Dale sat in the front row, phone face down on his thigh. The agenda was printed on pink paper and distributed at each seat. Item 1, budget review. Item 2, community proposals. Item 3, addressing ongoing property concerns, Gikawi Shepherd property. My name was the last thing on her list. She planned to use the meeting to publicly condemn me. She didn't know I planned to use it for something else entirely. I sat in the third row, Connor behind me, Jeanette at a corner table with her laptop open. My bag was at my feet. Inside it, a blacklight, a flash drive, and 3 months of patience about to pay off. Tammy read the budget like a children's book. Simple words, cheerful tone, fictional numbers. 14,000 for the fire pit project, progressing nicely. 28,000 for snow removal, keeping our roads safe. 22,000 for landscaping, maintaining our mountain beauty. People nodded. They always nodded. Nobody had ever questioned the numbers because questioning Tammy was more trouble than paying dues and looking the other way. She moved to item 3, my property concerns. She started listing violations: workshop noise, truck parking, exterior storage, woodpile location, building her case in front of the audience like a prosecutor at a PTA meeting. I raised my hand. She ignored it. I raised it higher. She sighed audibly. "This isn't public comment, Mr. Shepherd. I'd like to present some information, as a neighbor." She looked at Dale. Dale shrugged. She looked at the room. People were watching. Refusing would look worse than allowing. "You have 2 minutes. I'll need more than 2 minutes, but I think you'll want to hear this." I stood up and walked to the projector. Connor was already connecting the laptop. First slide, trail camera compilation, 3 months of footage compressed into a 4-minute video. 47 trips, date stamps, time stamps, temperature overlays. Tammy's face, clear and unmistakable, on every frame. Loading my firewood into her garden cart. Hauling it across the property line. 387 logs. At current firewood prices, approximately $2,700 in stolen wood. The room went from confused to uncomfortable to dead silent. People looked at Tammy. Tammy looked at the screen. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Second wave, Connor stood up. He played his own footage. 23 nights of Tammy on his property, taking his firewood. Then the Petersons stood, their snowblower, then the Harrisons, solar lights, then Darla Whitmore, garden tools, 5 households, 5 patterns, 1 thief. The room was vibrating with the kind of realization that changes everything. The moment a group of people simultaneously understand they've all been robbed by the person they trusted to protect them. Third wave, the black light. I pulled it from my bag. Battery-powered, 18 inches long, the kind used in forensic investigation. "Tammy, could you hold up your hands?" She didn't move. Her fingers tightened on the clipboard. "Your hands, Tammy." Slowly, she held them up, palms out, fingers spread. I nodded to Connor, who hit the light switch. The room went dark. I turned on the black light. Her hands glowed bright blue, every crease, every fingerprint, under her nails, her wrists, her forearms where she'd rolled up her sleeves to load logs. On her white puffer jacket, streaks and handprints and smears of UV reactive dye that had transferred from the logs to her hands to everything she touched. On her scarf, on her clipboard. The room gasped. Not a polite gasp, but a gut punch gasp, the kind you hear when something impossible becomes visible. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else stood up for a better look. Tammy's hands hung in the air like 2 glowing accusations. Blue light mapping every crease and line like a topographic map of guilt. I explained it calmly. UV reactive dye, the same compound law enforcement uses in bait money operations. Completely legal, non-toxic. I placed it inside modified firewood logs on my own property. The only way to get that dye on your hands, your clothes, and your furniture is to handle and burn those logs. There is no other explanation. There is no alternative source. Tammy stared at her glowing hands. This is... She couldn't finish. For the first time in 7 years, the woman with something to say about everything had nothing to say about this. Fourth wave, Jeanette's slides. 5 years of HOA financial records, reconstructed from bank statements, vendor contracts, and public filings. The Community Fire Pit Fund, $14,000 collected. No fire pit, money transferred to Tammy's personal account. The Snow Removal Fund, $85,000 in overpayments routed to account 7714. Summit Ridge Landscaping LLC, $22,000 per year paid to Dale's Shell Company. Planning Commission variances approved without disclosure. Every dollar, every transfer, every lie. $87,000. Dale uncrossed his legs. His phone was still face down. He didn't reach for it. Connor stood at the back of the room. He waited for the last slide to land. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of 30 years of putting criminals in rooms exactly like this one. "You gave yourself 7 years of everyone else's money, Tammy. That's not leadership. That's larceny." The back door opened. Sheriff Paxton walked in with a deputy. The same sheriff who'd called this a neighborhood disagreement. The same man who'd suggested mediation. He walked to the front of the room and stopped in front of Tammy's table. "Mrs. Voss, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of felony theft and misappropriation of fiduciary funds." Her clipboard hit the floor. The sharp plastic clack against the hardwood echoed through the room like a gavel. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard that clipboard make. Glitter caught the fluorescent lights as they led her out. Gold, silver, hot pink, embedded in the fabric of her white puffer jacket, sparkling with every step. She looked like a disco ball being escorted to a squad car. The UV dye on her hands still glowed faintly even under the fluorescent overheads. Autumn Creighton's camera fired 12 times. She got the hands. She got the arrest. She got the clipboard on the floor. The next morning's front page carried the photo of Tammy's glowing hands above the fold. It was shared 4,000 times before noon. Connor was elected interim HOA president that evening. 21-0. Nobody abstained. His first act was commissioning an independent financial audit. His second was voiding every violation notice Tammy had ever issued. His third was inviting me to the next community barbecue. I said I'd bring the firewood. Nobody laughed. Then everybody laughed. It was the first real laughter I'd heard in that community room. Not polite laughter, not nervous laughter. The laughter of people who just watched a weight get lifted off their neighborhood. Tammy was charged with felony theft, cumulative value exceeding $5,000, and misappropriation of fiduciary funds. Class 4 felony in Colorado, 2 to 6 years. She took a plea deal, 18 months in county, 3 years probation, and full restitution. Her attorney argued for community service. The judge reminded him that Tammy's idea of community service was stealing from the community she served. Dale was removed from the Planning Commission. An ethics investigation was opened into the 4 variances he'd approved without disclosure. Summit Ridge Landscaping, LLC, was dissolved. The variances were under review, including the one that extended Tammy and Dale's own house past the setback line. There was talk of requiring them to tear down the extension. I hadn't heard whether that happened yet, but the possibility alone was worth the price of 20 oak logs. The community recovered $81,000 of the $87,000. The missing $6,000 was the cost of learning that the person with the biggest clipboard isn't always the biggest authority. Sometimes they're just the biggest thief. The independent audit confirmed every number Jeanette had found. The new board voted unanimously to require dual signatures on all accounts, quarterly financial reports sent to every homeowner, and an annual third-party audit. The rules Tammy should have followed from the start. I received $34,000 in restitution, firewood, trees, fraudulent fines, and legal costs. I used part of it for lumber, black walnut, cherry, white oak, the good stuff, the wood you save for projects that matter. I set up a free Saturday woodworking class for the neighborhood kids. Lily was my teaching assistant. She made each kid a hand-carved pine name tag, carved their name with a chisel, sanded it smooth, drilled a hole for a lanyard. It's what my grandfather would have done. Mountain Woodcraft Workshop. 8 kids showed up the first Saturday, 12 the second. By month 3, parents started showing up to watch. Some of them stayed to learn. One Saturday, a kid named Jack, 12, quiet, built like a reed, made a cutting board from scrap cherry. He sanded it for 40 minutes without being told to. When he held it up, the grain caught the light and the wood glowed pink and gold. He said it was for his mom. I thought about my grandfather, about the first time he handed me a finished piece and said, "That's yours. You made that." Some things don't skip a generation. They just take the long way around. Connor established the Timbercrest Firewood Co-op, a shared system. Donate extra wood, take what you need during cold snaps, no stealing, no 2 a.m. cart runs, no invented rules, no clipboard required, just neighbors being neighbors, the way it should have worked from the beginning. Tammy's house required professional cleaning before it could be listed. The service cost $4,200. They pulled glitter from the air ducts, the carpet pad, the floorboard seams, the washing machine filter behind the dryer, and inside the refrigerator door seal. Glitter is the herpes of the craft world. Once it's in your house, it never fully leaves. The house sold at a 20% discount. The listing disclosed residual decorative material in the HVAC system. The new owner's contractor opened the air return vent 3 weeks after closing. A cloud of pink and gold glitter puffed into his face. He sneezed 3 times, wiped his eyes, and said to no one in particular, "What the hell happened in this house?" We planted 2 new ponderosa pines in April, same spots where the old ones had stood. Lily helped dig. The saplings were small, 4 feet, skinny, with soft needles that bent in the wind. 60 years from now, they'll be 80 feet tall. I won't be around to see it, but someone will. Trees don't need the story, they just need the dirt. On a Saturday evening after the last kid left the workshop, I stood in the doorway and listened to the ridge go quiet. The air was warming. Snow melted off the roof in long drips that caught the last light. The woodpile stood against the south wall. 8 cords, tight, untouched. Nobody stealing anymore. Nobody needed to. Nobody wanted to. Lily had left a carving on the workbench. A little bird, rough but recognizable, wings outstretched like it was about to lift off the wood and fly through the window. I turned it over. The grain was straight. The cuts were getting cleaner. She was learning. If you've had a neighbor who helped themselves to your stuff and called it community spirit, drop your story below. And if you want to see what happens when an HOA Karen picks a fight with a beekeeper's honey operation, subscribe. That one gets sticky.
Here's the thing about Tammy Ghost. She wasn't just a firewood thief. She was a cheater. 7 years of using a clipboard and a title to take whatever she wanted from whoever she wanted. Firewood, trees, $87,000. And nobody stopped her because the people who should have the sheriff, the county the board decided it was easier to look the other way. What made Wyatt win wasn't the glitter. It was documentation. Trail cameras, receipts, a forensic accountant, a certified arborist. He didn't find Tammy with anger. He fought her with evidence so thorough that when the black light turned on, there was nothing left to argue. The takeaway: the person with the biggest voice isn't always right. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one watching, recording, building a case, while everyone else looks away is the one who changes everything. And sometimes justice arrives covered in a glitter. The HOA has ever made you feel like the rules only apply to you? Tell me in the comments. Hit subscribe. Next week, a natural Karen picks a fight with a beekeeper. That one gets sticky.